Welcome to the Above and Beyond Recovery Podcast, where we explore recovery and its relationship to faith, family, work, community, and health.
Hello, I'm Amber Didden, today's host of the Above and Beyond Recovery Podcast. On today's episode, we'll be talking about marriage and recovery. How do marriages survive addiction and relapse, and how can spouses of people in recovery manage codependency? Our guest today is Heather Powell. As many of you know, this show is produced by Pennsylvania Adult and Teen Challenge, and Heather just happens to be our VP of HR and Programming, but she's also one of my very best friends. I'm really looking forward to our conversation. So Heather, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Heather, you and I have known each other for several years, and so we know about each other's story and kind of where we came from, but our audience has never met you before. So can you tell us a little bit about yourself and get into a little bit of your recovery story? What is it that brings you to Pennsylvania Adult and Teen Challenge, and what do you know about addiction and recovery?
So as you know, I've been with PAATC for about 6 years now. What brought me here was my husband, who also works here. And I actually met him almost 10 years ago when he was an intern in the program here. We're actually from the same town, as you know, but we did not hang out with the same circles. So I actually ended up meeting him. He had about 3 years of sobriety at that time, I think. And we fell into what we thought was love, which was probably more like limerence or infatuation. He ended up leaving the internship program to move back home to be with me. And at the time, many of the mentors and other guys in the program that were in his life warned him and said, you should not do this. This is a really bad move. You've got a lot of time of sobriety. You're on the right path. You're making good choices. Do not leave for a girl.
And you were the girl.
I was the girl, you know, and now that I work with interns, I'm like, do not leave for a girl. But, you know, we had to learn the hard way. So he left and came back to our hometown.
And let me just ask you real quick, what was your experience up to that point with recovery and addiction? Had you ever had someone in your life that you knew that had struggled with addiction, or had you had any kind of struggle like that? Or what was your understanding kind of going into this relationship?
I was very naive. I did not know a lot about addiction. I have a brother who is 18 years older than me, who is an alcoholic, and he never really had long periods of sobriety at all. So besides that, I had no experience. So when I met my husband and he had 3 years, I was like, oh, he's cured. Like 3 years sobriety, I have nothing to worry about. Like everything's going to be perfect. So I had no idea what I was getting myself into, really, and the kind of support and you know, the issues that would come up. I just had no idea.
So he moved home for the girl.
Yes, he moved home for the girl. He ended up relapsing very early on. I did not know. Looking back, there were warning signs, you know, him nodding out, just being really shady about different things, needing to disappear, to go to the bathroom, staying there for long periods of time. You know, I was infatuated and I looked past all of these like giant red flags. And I didn't realize he relapsed until actually the day I brought our son home from the hospital after I gave birth.
So rewind. So you got pregnant after he came home.
Mm-hmm.
And then so for how long of your pregnancy do you think that he had been in a relapse?
Probably the majority of the pregnancy. And I had no idea. Again, the nodding out, you know, when someone's in active addiction, they can explain away all of these signs that you see. So, you know, him nodding out was because he just worked a 12-hour day, you know, or he had to do several shifts. And we were watching a movie and he just, you know, he fell asleep. He wasn't nodding out, he fell asleep. So that period of time was just full of all of these excuses that I just ate up. I just really did not know what was happening.
That really touches on something that I've experienced too, which is that, and this happens in other relationships, even outside of addictive relationships, but that idea of like gaslighting, where your whole universe kind of takes on this weird sheen where you think you know what is reality, but the person that you're talking to is describing a different reality, and how that changes your perception of everything. It's just really wild. And then trying to make decisions and move forward and have conversations when the two of you are looking at very different realities. And then we'll talk about this a little bit more, I think, later, but then learning to trust yourself on the other side of that, and trusting that you know what you see is true, and believing what you believe to be true. But anyway, so you gave birth to your son.
So I gave birth to my son, and then for the next year, there was a period of sobriety and him relapsing continuously over and over again. In reality, he was probably never really sober. There was lots of lies, manipulation, deceit, gaslighting, lots of fights for me questioning his sobriety, because he was manipulating me because he didn't want to get caught. So yeah, I would find paraphernalia around the house. We had a young child learning how to walk. I would find it in the couch. I would find the baggies in his clothes. And, I already had anxiety, but this just took my anxiety disorder to an entire different level. I was, 24/7 just driving myself insane, worried about whether he was going to die, because I couldn't control this, So, where is he? Why can't I get a hold of him? What if he uses too much? What am I going to do? I've got this child now. This is not what I signed up for. This is not how my story is supposed to end. So yeah, it was my own living hell.
What kind of resources did you have at the time, if any? Like, did you have anybody that you could talk to? Anybody that was giving you any kind of guidance? Had you talked about treatment? Like, what did you have available to you at the time?
So again, I was very naive about recovery. So when he would tell me that he wasn't going to use anymore, I believed him. I didn't understand that he was just manipulating me and really needed to go to treatment. And we've talked a little bit about codependency, but I think I just wanted to believe him so bad. And part of that was I was separating from the people who loved me the most and who were giving me sound advice, because in their minds, they're like, you need to leave. This is not a good situation. Like, Heather, he is lying to you over and over and over again. And I was not there to receive any of that information. Like, if you were going to tell me that, the conversation was done. So over time, I stopped opening up to those people who had known me my entire life. I was working for a ministry at that time, so there was a female pastor that I did open up to. And when it got to the point where I needed him to go to treatment and to leave, she's the one who in essence told me I needed to do that.
Well, I know you already know this, but my husband's in recovery, and we've been through cycles of relapse in our marriage. And I know, one of the first times that happened, I was in the same kind of situation, didn't have any resources, any education. I didn't know what recovery looked like at all. And our solution was, let's move out of state. We were like, well, we could just move away from all of it. Right. But in that process, moved away from so many of our friends and support systems that maybe could have helped us a little bit. And all that did was put a Band-Aid on it for the year that we were out of state. And then when we moved back, we found ourselves in the same situation. So when you don't have those resources, it's very difficult to make decisions that are going to be healthy for you and for your family.
Yeah. Do you think, though, even if you had those people there to talk to you, like, would you have been open to that? Would you have received that information? Or were you so in love that you would have ignored it? Because that's where I was. Like, they were telling me, I had tons of people telling me this, but I was not leaving him. So don't tell me to do that.
For me, I was like 8 months pregnant at the time. And so the decision was more like physical. Like, I'm about to have a baby. I can't send my husband off to rehab he's going to be gone when I have this baby, you know, and it was our first child. And, you know, that just like wasn't part of the narrative I had in my mind. So, yeah, I don't think I would have listened for that reason, but also I just didn't have people that were telling me like, actually, I take that back. I did have a couple of people that were telling me that, but again, it just came down to I'm having a baby. Like, what do you expect me to do? Now, on the other side of that, I wish I could go back and tell myself, like, you are going to be okay if you have this baby and your husband's in rehab, and that probably will help you in the long run. Yeah. But that, you know, you make the decision you make at the time. Yeah. So you reached out to your pastor. She was a support for you. And then how did your husband's name, can we share his name? Sure. So your husband's name is Bill. So how did Bill eventually get into treatment?
So it was after my son's birthday and then my first Mother's Day. I found him OD'd in the bathroom. So at that point, I called her and she was like, you have to leave. You've given him so many chances. He's not getting better, Heather. Like, you have to go. So I ended up moving back in with my parents in my 30s, which was very humbling. But I mean, they were very gracious, and I was very blessed to have them welcome me back and to help me to live with them and to help raise my son. Obviously, they were quite upset as well, but they were a great support. So yeah, I moved back with them and told him, like, you've got to go back to Teen Challenge. You need to figure this out. This is the only chance I'm giving you. I'm done. And we can kind of discuss where we're at after you take care of yourself. But I'm done living through these relapses. It will not happen again. I'm done. So that's kind of where things were left. He went back to Teen Challenge. He was away for a year. Life kind of went on, did phone calls, came up for some visits. I drove 5 hours to visit him so that he could see his son. Eventually, you know, realized he couldn't come back to our hometown. You know, now that I know about recovery, it's people, places, things. Well, we lived in a small town. He got high or partied in almost every spot in that town. There were no good influences there for him. The people we were running into were people he used to party with. So, you know, their way of seeing how he was doing was inviting him to come out and party again. So there were just way too many triggers for him there. I had kind of taken a demotion. I was very successful before this happened. And then after I got pregnant, I went through some illness, went through this. And so I took more of an entry-level HR job at this ministry and started working my way up. And, you know, eventually ended up making our way over to Pennsylvania, got a job with Teen Challenge, worked my way up here through the Human Resources Department, and we were able to get married, reunite our family, and kind of work on rebuilding that trust and that relationship again.
All right, so talk to me a little bit about when he was in treatment, you were staying with your parents. Can you tell me more about like what was happening internally with you? Like, did you feel like you started to heal in that moment? Did you feel like you were being hurt further in that moment that he was in treatment? Like, what was that process like for you when he was away?
Well, I would start off by saying if I could go back in time, I would have gotten myself into counseling. I did not realize at the time what an immense amount of trauma I went through by living through this experience. You know, your spouse, you know, they're your partner, they're supposed to be your safe place. So when your partner is not safe and what they're doing is harming you over and over and over again, that creates trauma. And I wasn't really aware of that. I was in survival mode during that time. So I did not deal with that for a very, very, very long time. And it's something I'm still dealing with today. But yeah, it was really about survival mode, taking care of my son, trying to try and heal. And honestly, some of the best sleep I got in my life was knowing he was at treatment, because I didn't have to worry about him overdosing and dying. I stopped having anxiety attacks and like crying every single day. I was able to start to enjoy life again, reconnect with some of my friends. Those relationships were very, very strained because, like I said, I cut everyone off who did not support the relationship that I wanted to succeed. So I kind of dug this hole and put myself in there. So I really only had my family. So I was really working on reestablishing relationships, spending time with my son, working, again, just kind of survival mode is really what it was.
We've talked about this a lot on the show, just the idea that for every person who is in recovery, their entire families and their entire communities are also impacted by their substance abuse and then ultimately, hopefully, their recovery. But that's something that we haven't really zeroed in on is the trauma that occurs, especially for spouses, and I'm sure it happens for parents too, but all those kinds of things, like how it impacts your job performance, how it impacts you as a parent, and then the recovery from the trauma takes so much time. I mean, I just know from my experience that there were moments in the past few years where like I just was not a functioning human being because of the weight of what was happening with my spouse. So yeah, I think that's really important, especially when we are helping support other spouses who may be in the same situation to understand what's occurring at that moment. They're going through a very tremendous amount of trauma.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, one of the biggest disservices I did to myself was repressing that trauma and not dealing with it in a healthy way. You know, it was kind of, he wasn't there, so it was out of sight, out of mind. I've got stuff to do. I have a child to take care of. I have work to do. And really, I should have taken that time to work on myself and dealing with that. The last several years would have been much easier if I kind of would have done that the healthy way. And so that's something, you know, now in the positions that we're in, I know that we both tend to tell people that, like, you have to deal with this. You can't rug sweep this. This isn't going to just go away. You've got to deal with this, or it's not going to end well for you mentally, you know.
Something I think is really interesting that I've seen happen with women that have come to like our family day, women that I've interacted with, that's definitely happened to me, was that at one point my husband relapsed and he went into our restoration program as well. And it kind of like felt like a fairy tale, you know, like all of a sudden he got the help that he needed. He was very repentant and just ready to change. And people swooped in and surrounded me and supported me. And it felt like from here on out, everything's going to be fine. And for that reason, I swept it under the rug, what I had felt and the trauma and all of that hurt and pain, because I was like, what do you mean? This is the happy ending, right? Like he's in treatment and everything's going to be great. Right. And so I didn't feel like it was a hurt that needed healing. I felt like this was the resolve. And so now that he's in treatment and even when he came home and we were reunited and like everything felt like, well, that's just the bow on top of everything. And I didn't have to deal with the hurt underneath that. Now that came back to bite me much later. But for the same reason, like whether you're intentionally sweeping it under because you don't want to deal with the pain, or you are not tricked, but kind of lulled into feeling like, okay, it's going to be okay now. I think it's important for family members to understand you've been hurt and you need to get help to heal from that hurt.
Yeah. Your feelings are valid. You know, the pain you've experienced is valid. And while, you know, it's like, all the spotlight is on your spouse and them needing to get treatment, which obviously is the biggest thing here. But you need to take that self-care. You need that attention yourself to work through your feelings and for people to support you and really for you to support yourself through your own journey, you know, your own healing mentally and spiritually after dealing with that.
So I know for me, when my husband came home from treatment and we were reunited, that's when the anxiety kicked in for me, because once he came home and I was living with this person, I was constantly thinking, is this going to happen again? Am I going to go through this again? So did that happen for you once you guys got married and moved back in together, and kind of what emotions were you feeling then at that point?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, resounding yes. Yes, it did. It was difficult all over again, but it was different. So before the anxiety, while he was going through the active addiction, was all around knowing he was using. Now it was the fact that he was sober, but he had told me he was sober so many times before, trying to reach that next step where I could trust him and believe him that he was sober, that he was following the correct steps. But yeah, I mean, every time he left the house, he was working for Teen Challenge. So if he needed to go into the city to pick up supplies, I mean, I'm having anxiety. Is he on this certain street? Every time. It took a very long time. And I think that, we've talked about this before. There's a pressure that's put on you as the spouse, and like society thinks it's your job to keep your spouse sober. And so you have people kind of telling you that, well, are you doing this? Are you doing that?
It's so subtle. It's like I've gotten so many questions like, well, are you guys doing this together? Is he doing this together? Right. And frankly, it's not my job to make sure he's doing X, Y, Z. I can be supportive, but it is not my job to make sure he's going to the meetings or make sure that this thing is happening. And those kind of external pressures cause a lot of pressure in yourself, because you start to think like, gosh, am I doing enough to make sure that this doesn't happen to me again?
And I know it's like they mean well, and I understand where the sentiment is coming from. They care about your spouse and they want to ensure that they're sober also. So they're giving you advice. But you're right. There was this pressure on me. So I started to get really obsessed with the regimen that he needed to follow to quote unquote ensure that he remained sober. So we would fight a lot. Like, did you do your daily devotions? Have you been going to your meetings? Do you have someone you can talk to about this? Who are you sharing your personal issues with? If you have triggers, who are you talking to about this? Do you have a mentor? I'm like going down the list, and I just became so obsessed with it, so that if he wasn't doing his devotions for a day, I mean, I'm full on crying. I'm convinced he's going to relapse. It was horrible again. And I didn't find relief until I found freedom from that thought. Like you said, my job as a spouse is to support you in your recovery, but you're a big boy. You're an adult. You've got to take responsibility for your sobriety. This isn't on me, and that's not fair to put that on me. I will just drive myself insane, and I will lose who I am as a person if my sole focus is on you remaining sober. And I don't want to be your mom. I'm already a mom. I don't want to be your mom. I want to be your partner.
So when did you come to that epiphany, and how did you come to that?
It took years. It took years for me to get to that point. And I think it was just really self-reflection, trying to, I've gone through this phase, a couple of times over the past several years of evaluating where I'm at in my life, and am I mentally healthy? Am I fulfilled? And I realized that was a barrier to my well-being, and just realizing, I have anxiety disorder. Anxiety is about control, and just coming to terms with the fact that I can't control this. I can obsess as much as I want, but I cannot make him go to those meetings. I cannot make him do his devotion and follow the right steps. So just realizing like I'm going to lose Heather if I don't stop this. That was a groundbreaking moment for me.
Well, that's it for us today. We're definitely going to do a part 2 episode with Heather because we had so much to talk about. So thank you again, Heather, for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us. The Above and Beyond Recovery podcast is a production of Pennsylvania Adult and Teen Challenge. If you or a loved one needs help with addiction, call us now at 844-888-8085 or find us online at paatc.org. That information is also in our show notes. Join us next time as we continue the conversation.